All right. So tonight I have the pleasure of having Diane Martinez teach us. So Diane, take it away.
All righty. Can you hear me okay?
Oh, yes.
All right, great. Well, God bless everyone. And I am so thankful to get to share this information. I don't know, maybe it's nerves, I'm not sure. But thank you, John. Thank you for allowing me to teach this. I've taught this once before, although I will say that with John, this was about a year ago. Many of you know, many of you don't know. So I'm just trying to give a good intro here. About a year ago or so, John was doing the series on the one hope of original Christianity. He was doing all the ones, one Lord, one hope, one baptism. And he had asked me to share, and I shared this presentation. I am God, declaring the end from the beginning. However, what I'd like to say is that, and at the very end, by the way, of this presentation, I'll have one slide. I highly suggest that you go back to, I'll have the links there for you, back to that class of John's to get some more information. I won't be covering all of the information I covered in those. There were 3 presentations. And again, you'll have that on the last slide here, so you can go back to it. But there is still plenty to say, plenty to go through, but this time, and many of you, again, I'm speaking, I realize I think I'm speaking to 2 cohorts of people on the line, some who I've actually had the privilege of sharing at your homes or elsewhere you've been in my home, and I've been able to share what has been my passion for the past since 2013, so let's do the math. I guess that's almost 9 years now, on the topic of He's coming back. That is my passion. It has been my passion in light of teaching. It's just about, every time I teach, it's just about, that's what I'm teaching about, because Jesus Christ is coming back. And I know that many of you know that, some may not, I'm not sure. But again, to the audience here, as that is the greatest topic that I have been privileged to share over the past several years. This is one of those presentations within that class. The class is actually just simply called He's Coming Back. And one of the sessions in that class, I cover this material. And again, tonight I will share with you much of that material. Some of it is, a few things are new. But again, in light of what John is teaching now, what Reverend Nessel is teaching now, he started six weeks ago on the topic of Old Testament history. Well, I mean, you can't go as far, the furthest back you can go is in Genesis. And John, if I'm not mistaken, his heart and his desire was to spend quite a bit of time in Genesis. And as we know, we're all part of the body of Christ. We're members in particular. And so many of us, it takes all of us to dig into the word. None of us, I'm preaching to the choir. I know you know this, but I feel it's important just to mention. In the body of Christ, as members in particular, God works in us according to our character, according to our personalities, and just the way the Spirit of God works in us. And we see different things. Many of you saw I think it was last week or 2 weeks ago, Mel Elliott had shared, and I'll be speaking to that in a few minutes here on some of the slides that I have. But we see things perhaps from different perspectives. I sometimes think about, I give the example, if you were an eyewitness to a car accident, let's just say, well, one person saw that the light turned green. Another person noticed that the gentleman was swaying. Another person, it takes everybody to bring in the detail to have the full picture. So I'm thrilled that I have this opportunity to share with you in light of John's heart and his direction, I believe, by God, to cover from the Old Testament history class that he's presenting, to spend some time in Genesis, because it's just so packed. So here we go. And this verse, Isaiah 46:10, several years ago, changed my life. This is what got me on a quest when I stumbled actually across this verse. I am God, declaring the end from the beginning. Well, just ponder that for a second. If that's true, and I believe it's true because it's in the Bible, God says he has declared the end from the beginning. Now, in light of my presentation in class on he's coming back, this means a lot. But again, it's the end from the beginning. So we need to go back to the beginning to get many of the clues. And my heart and desire tonight is that my goal is simply to have you individually fall in love with the magnitude and the magnificence of both God and his word. So here we go. Well, here's the verse and expanded just a bit. It says, remember the former things of old, for I am God, there is none else. I am God and there is none like me. That's for sure. Declaring the end from the beginning and from ancient times, the things that are not yet done. The last few words of this verse end with, it's not on the chart here on the slide, but it ends with, my counsel shall stand. My counsel, God says, my counsel shall stand, and I will do all of my pleasure. So if we want to know the end of a matter, we really need to start at the beginning, because God's declared the end from the beginning, right? So another verse in Ecclesiastes, which has some similitude of the past, the previous slide. The Bible's filled with examples of cycles and patterns and repetitive events. And prophecy, as we know, prophecy relates to the past, present, and the future. This verse here in Ecclesiastes, the thing, God says, the thing that has been, it is that which shall be. And that which is done is that which shall be done. And there is no new thing under the sun. Is there anything whereof it may be said, see, this is new? It hath been already of old time, which was before us. And that alone is something to truly ponder as you work God's word. But as I said, the Bible is filled with cycles and events, repetitive events, and God's designed his word with purposeful patterns. And I know in my class, we go over so many different patterns, and because history tends to repeat itself. We've heard that saying before. But as God does have in his word, he has purposeful patterns and symmetry. It proves that he inspired it. And hopefully tonight, by the time we're finished, you will, if you had any doubt, truly, that God, it's his word, and he will prove his all just phenomenal design to the word starting in Genesis. We can see his design not only through types and parallels in the word, but also in numbers. I mean, some of you know this, in numbers, in meanings of names of people, in the meanings of names of places. These are all part of the deep things of God. Well, we're in Genesis, and Genesis is the book of beginnings, right? That's what the word itself means, Genesis. So I'm still on the topic of the end from the beginning, by the way, and we'll see how the two are connected. But in lieu of this slide, just look at this slide. I had stumbled across this. I'm not even sure when it was, but this together with what I'm about to share, and I'll be hitting several high points as we go through several verses in Genesis, but there's over 100 references to Genesis in the New Testament. 60 of those references pertain specifically to the chapters 1 through 11 in the New Testament. And as you see there, it says, and the New Testament also refers to all 11 chapters of Genesis. Jesus himself referred to Genesis 1 through 11 at least 16 times because they were referring to history. Well, as I said, Genesis is the book of beginnings. So there's an interesting code that's embedded in just the first few chapters of Genesis, specifically chapters 1 through 11. Beginning right around Genesis chapter 11. And by the way, this specific nugget that I'm sharing with you now, I had first heard many years ago. I believe it was Perry Stone who had shared some of this. But there's an interesting code that's embedded, as I said, in the first couple of chapters, or first 11 chapters exactly, of Genesis. And that's Genesis. If you look at Genesis chapter 11, and that is if you go, well, let's just say this. If you're traveling, well, there's a next slide I want to share with you, but we'll find that. going backwards in the book of Genesis, and I don't mean to confuse anybody, I'll explain this in a moment. It's as if it begins to mirror the book of Revelation going forward. Okay, so let me explain. Time, okay, there's many aspects of time. One way time is counted is cyclical. A cyclical time. In other words, it has a beginning and it goes all the way around and it repeats itself back to where it started. They say that cyclical time emphasizes a lot of the repetitions and patterns that we see in the natural world. But there's other ways of time. There's linear time, and you can see there on the slide. You start at a certain point and you go horizontally. You go out further and further. That's linear time. And eventually linear time, if you start in one place and you keep going, you'll actually wind up in a place where time is no more, otherwise known as eternity. There's vertical time, and that's more like the up and down. Vertical is up and down. And I think of that in light of, let's talk about dimensions, okay? The earthly to the heavenly. An example in the Bible might be Jacob's ladder. You know, they saw angels coming up and going down, etc. But God lives outside of time. We know that God's in what we call timelessness. But the book of Genesis is sometimes actually called a miniature apocalypse, a revelation, because if you go, as I said, into the book of Genesis and you begin to study the stories moving forward, you'll soon are going to discover that the actual order of prophetic events that are going to happen in the future, you come across that. And for us, in the very near future, this is really important here. So prophetic time comes full circle. It almost seems like you begin going back to the beginning. And as I said, God has told us the end from the beginning. So let me give you this example. The Tower of Babel. In the book of Revelation, now this is around Genesis chapter 11, you'll find the Tower of Babel. But in the book of Revelation, somewhere, I believe it's chapter 17 or 18, it mentions the mystery Babylon, of course, and that has something to do with Babel, the Tower of Babel. And you'll find the Tower of Babel in Genesis chapter 11. And there's an interesting parallel. Around Genesis chapter 11, the descendants of Noah decided to build a tall, proud symbol of how great they had made their nation. It was a tower that was supposed to reach to the heavens so that they could be like God and they would not need God. I recently read something that mentioned that they built a tower whose top was unto heaven, and on the top there was a depiction of the heavens, like an astrological observatory. And they were trying to predict when the next catastrophic attack was going to be. Now you have to remember your history here. This Genesis chapter 11 is after the flood. Okay, so they were looking for another catastrophic event. The biblical account emphasizes that there's a sharp contrast between man's opinion of his own achievements and God's point of view on man's accomplishments. And the Tower of Babel being built by Nimrod. Nimrod is in Genesis, I believe it's 11:4. He wanted to, again, to build this tower that it would reach unto heaven. And according to Josephus, it was to be high enough so that if God chose to destroy the plains of Shinar with the flood waters, that the leaders would get to the top and survive. Sound familiar? Kind of like today we talk about the upper echelon with their bunkers and they foresee catastrophic events and they're trying to protect themselves so that they survive, et cetera, et cetera. But they were, at that time, they were all one global unit. This is Genesis chapter 11, a similitude perhaps of a first global government, if you will, or a new world order, if you will. And there are 5 key things that were parallel then today. Number 1, the tower was built in Shinar, and that's like modern day Iraq. Number 2, there was a rebel behind that tower, an antichrist type, and that was Nimrod. Number 3, all the people in Shinar were one global unit or a global kingdom under one covenant, like a one world government. They were all one religion, one world religion, and they had one currency, one world currency. Sound familiar? Well, did I just skip something? I just want to see something. I just want to make sure I didn't. Yeah, okay, I did not. So here I want to take you into what I was saying about cyclical time. If you start in Genesis 11, chapters 11, 10, and 9, and you go backwards, you actually start to see that prophecy. It actually starts revealing the future going forward. There is definitely a pattern here. So let's look at this. In Genesis chapter 11, 10, and 9, we see the Tower of Babel that I just spoke about, the one world government, religion, currency. There was violence, drunkenness, incest, homosexuality, shedding of innocent blood. Anything sound familiar there? In chapter 8, the Lord said in the last days, we see in chapter 8 of Genesis, there was the dove and the ark. And we know from God's word that the Lord said in the last days, he's going to pour out his spirit upon all flesh. When you go down to chapter 7 backwards, now mind you, we're going backwards towards the beginning, but we'll find that we're actually going forward towards the end. There were great upheavals in nature. It's in chapter 7, 6 and 7, but specifically 7, where we see the flood of Noah. So we start, this history there starts in 6 and it goes into 7. Last day cosmic activity. Now we see the hurricanes and tsunamis and the wildfires, and globally things are happening around the world. In chapter 6, the signs of the days of Noah. And back then, what led up to the flood was the violence, the evil imaginations, the corruption that was going on. And then interestingly enough, in chapter 5, now again, we're going backwards in Genesis, but if you think about it, it's the same events going forward into the time period that we're at. Genesis 5, chapter 5, look out. Right there is what I would call a type of the rapture of the church, right? There's Enoch in chapter 5. Read about it. Enoch is out walking with God, and he was not, for God took him. He was translated alive in Genesis. Now, I realize that perhaps not everyone on the line, Enoch died. If you don't know that, yes, he was translated, but he was being sought after. God translated him. But the key is he was out walking with God, and God took him. He translated from one place to another because he had the testimony, it says it in chapter 5, that he pleased God. And so, and by the way, let me just mention for those of you who are on the line who may have some confusion on that, read Hebrews chapter 11, where it talks about by faith Noah, by faith Enoch, by faith Abraham, and these all died. Enoch died, but it is a picture of a rapture, a man righteous before God, walking with God, and God took him because he pleased God. So as I said, that's in chapter 5. Then now what happens after the rapture? Because, a lot of people, I've thought about this before, where right here in this example, because, Christians seem to be divided. Is a pre-trib rapture, it is a post-trib, but here it's interesting where it lies. It's before that picture of the Antichrist in chapter 4. Where we have Cain, that wicked one. Of course, we have the tribulation period where the wicked one, the picture of the Antichrist there, back in chapter 4, we know that's Cain. He had the mark on his head, remember, the mark of the beast. He said, my punishment is 7 times 7, kind of mirroring the 7-year tribulation that's still coming in the future. In chapter 4, also Lamech in chapter 4, he said his punishment would be 70 times 7, 490, which is perhaps having something to do with the time frame of Daniel's 490. But again, that's another teaching. I'm trying to show you some greatness in the Word of God of history repeating itself from a cyclical time going forward in Genesis. You start to get to a place where you see history repeating itself, and we're actually going, as we go backwards in Genesis, we're going forward in Revelation. And here in chapter 4, as I said, we have Cain. Then in chapter 3, we have the binding of Satan. Remember in Revelation chapter 20, verse 2, the defeat of Satan, where God predicts Satan will be defeated. Well, actually, yeah, he'll be defeated. Remember Genesis chapter 3, verse 15, the announcement of the promised seed, and God says that Satan would be defeated. I'll put enmity between thee and the woman, and between her seed and thy seed. And then in chapter 2 and chapter 1, we have the 1,000-year reign of Christ going forward, but we know that the generations of the heavens and the earth were in 1,000-year cycles. We'll talk more about that in a few moments. Everything was perfect in Eden, and everything will be perfect in the New Jerusalem. Just give me a second here. I want to make sure I don't miss anything. Ultimately, so as I said, the first 2 chapters of Genesis, everything is perfect. The last 2 chapters of Revelation, everything is perfect. And so they reflect one another. Everything seems to come around full circle. So from the book of Genesis, we can see, looking at this parallel, it appears that from Genesis 11 going backwards, we start to see the future, actually, what we can look at. In the beginning, here's the 2 parallels. In the beginning, there was paradise. In the end, there'll be paradise. God's told us the end from the beginning, remember? In the beginning, God walked with man. In the end, God will be with man. In the beginning, there was access to the tree of life. And in the end, there'll be access to the tree of life. There was no sin in the beginning. There will be no sin in the end. There was no sickness and death in the beginning. There will be no sickness and death. Remember, death, the last enemy, will be destroyed. It's going to end the way it started, and the way it started is the way it's going to end. That's where it all comes around full circle, hence cyclical time, as I mentioned. And you can see I added something here to this. The first Adam's bride was Eve. She was taken from his body. It's interesting, the last Adam, Jesus Christ, we have the analogies of Israel, the bride, and the church, the body. That's a whole other teaching, but it's just fantastic, the detail that there is in Genesis, and hopefully you'll see that much more as we go forward. And so I like this slide. The beginning and the end sometimes look the same. As you can see, that little fella in his stroller and the older man in the wheelchair. So now I would like to play this. Let's see. Oops, we're going. All right. This is a clip that I would like to play, and this is the test. I need John, if you would unmute yourself, and as soon as I click it, let me know if you can hear it or not, please. Okay. John?
I am unmuted.
Okay, and I'm going to press it. Can you hear it?
Yes.
Perfect.
Let's continue to examine 2 more scientific unknowables of the very first verse in the Bible. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. In the very first verse of the Bible, we find a remarkable piece of evidence of supernatural authorship. In the beginning, time, God created the heavens, space, and the earth, matter. The Bible speaks of the creation of time, space, and matter in the very first verse. For thousands of years, scientists and philosophers had speculated about the basic components or makeup of the universe. It wasn't until the 20th century that physicists confirmed that the universe, at its foundation, consists of space, time, and matter. In fact, space and time are so tightly linked that astrophysicists now speak of a space-time continuum. While scientific and philosophical speculations about the basic structure of the universe has varied widely, the fact that the universe consists basically of space, time, and matter, a scientifically accepted fact since the 20th century, was clearly foreseen in the very first verse of the Bible, written 30 centuries ago. How could the writer of Genesis and the first verse of the Bible have known of this scientific truth that would not be confirmed until over 2,000 years later? But also, in the very first verse of the Bible, we find yet another astounding piece of evidence of supernatural or divine authorship. First, consider this. It is an undeniable fact that the number 7 is a biblical number of completion or perfection, or specifically divine authorship. Over 500 times in the Bible, the number 7 is used to show the touch of God or divinity upon something. This begins with the 7 first days of creation, and the 7th being declared by God as holy. When we look at the natural world around us, we discover that there are amazing arrays of 7s. There are 7 continents on the globe. Modern geographical classification schemes count 7 oceans in the world. There are 7 colors in a rainbow. There are 7 notes on a musical scale. There are 7 stars in the Big Dipper, and this heavenly sign has been used to point to the North Star or the guiding star since the most ancient of times. 7 objects in our solar system are visible to the naked eye. 7 digits in a row has been proven over and over to be the average limit of memory for most human beings. Thus, we have only 7 digits in our phone numbers. There are 7 metals of antiquity upon which civilization was based. The periodic table of elements consists of 7 distinct levels. And on the 7s in the world around us go, each representing God's divine touch of completeness upon something. Now, with this in mind, consider again the very first words of the Bible, the very first verse, one sentence, translated in English as, "In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth." It contains exactly 10 words. But in the original Hebrew, there are exactly 7 words. And these 7 words possess 7 distinctive features of the number 7 contained within that sentence. As far as anyone has been able to determine thus far, only this one verse in all the Bible contains 7 features of the number 7 out of 7 words. Consider these 7 features. Feature number 1. The number of Hebrew words in this verse is exactly 7. Feature 2. The total number of Hebrew letters in the 7 words is exactly 28, or 4 times 7. Feature 3. The 3 leading words in this verse of 7 words are, of course, God, the subject, and heavens and earth, the objects. The number of letters in the Hebrew words that make up these 3 words is exactly 14, or 2 times 7. The number of letters in the remaining words of the verse is also 14, or 2 times 7. Feature number 4. The expression of the 2 objects of this sentence, the heavens and the earth, in Hebrew, is made up of 14 letters, or 2 times 7. Feature number 5. The shortest word is in the middle. The number of letters in this word and the word to its left is 7. The number of letters in the middle word and the word to its right is also 7. Feature number 6. There are 3 important nouns in this first verse: God, heaven, and earth. The numeric gematria values of these 3 nouns are 86, 395, and 296, respectively. Gematria is the 3,000-year-old Hebrew rabbinical practice of assigning numerical values to each of the Hebrew letters. When these 3 numerical values are added together, the total value is 777, or 777, or 111 times 7. In God's manner of biblical expression, this triple intensification of his perfect number 7 is the strongest possible manner of speaking the touch of his divinity. And feature number 7. The numeric value of the only Hebrew verb in this verse, created, or bara, is 203, which is exactly 29 times 7. These 7s These numeric features or facts are strangely hidden beneath the surface. They are truly beyond the view of ordinary readers of the Hebrew text, and they are discovered only by special investigation and counting. Surely they could not have been foreseen or purposely placed there by the original author. According to the law of chances, for any one feature of a 7-word sentence to be a multiple of 7 accidentally is only 1 chance in 7. But for 7 features of this one 7-word sentence to be a multiple of 7 accidentally is 1 chance in 823,543. An exponentially amazing impossibility, especially considering that the number 7 is used purposely by the biblical writers over 500 times from Genesis to Revelation to indicate the divine touch of God. It is as though God is telling those who have eyes to see in the very first verse that His divine touch is upon this word we call the Bible. This startling revelation of sevens has only been discovered in the last few years of human history.
All right. Well, we will be getting back to that verse in a few slides here. I'll be sharing temporarily, but I want to bring this up right now. I felt it was a good time. As I said earlier, 2 weeks ago, I believe it was, Mel Elliott, believer from New York, wrote this book, Genesis 1, God's Table of Contents to the Bible. And by the way, I have spoken with Mel just yesterday, or was it today? Maybe my days run together, but he gave me permission. I asked him if I could please put his email address, that's his email address, on there. And you're more than welcome to request from him a free copy of the book in a PDF form. He made that available 2 weeks ago, but I know that everyone who is on the call tonight was not necessarily on that call that night. So, but when I had stayed one night at his house several years ago, because they had invited me up to teach on He's Coming Back, my other presentation. And he had no idea what I was actually going to be teaching. And I actually had no idea that this man had written this book, Genesis 1, God's Table of Contents to the Bible. And when we got home that evening, he pulled out the book and he brought it over. He gave my husband, wrote in it, and my jaw just dropped. But I said this 2 weeks ago. I was on the call with John and some of you, and when Mel taught. I highly suggest you go back and listen to that. It's on YouTube. But when I saw this title, I'm beyond words. That to me, there is no greater description than that title. Genesis 1, God's Table of Contents to the Bible. Because it's, as we know, any book that you buy or people write books, the first thing you get to is the table of contents. It tells you the content of everything right there in the beginning, and you can go to the rest of the book and know what it is you're about to read about, etc. Well, Genesis 1 is in fact a great table of contents to the Bible. Genesis is the book of beginnings. And that's, as I said, what the word means itself. Genesis 1 has been designed by God as a table of contents, dividing the Bible into 7 sections or chapters, if you will, which collectively comprise. Now, I'm quoting, by the way, I should have mentioned that. I'm quoting something from the book, from Mel's book. This is a quote from his book. Genesis chapter 1 has been designed by God as a table of contents, dividing the Bible into 7 sections or chapters, which collectively comprise all the time of the earth we now live in, beginning with the first man until the time in which people shall appear before him in the end at his great white throne to answer for all things done in this life. And on the back of the book, I have the front of the book here. On the back of the actual book, it says, most Christians are familiar with the story of creation that's found in the book of Genesis, but have you ever considered that God, as a very capable author who carefully designed the Bible using Genesis chapter 1 as a table of contents that sets up the entire framework for the rest of the scriptures? Have you ever considered that? I know I hadn't, although I had started to see things. So his book certainly helped. And if this is actually the case, that Genesis 1 is a table of contents, that it introduces physical symbolism and great themes that are just amplified throughout the rest of the book. And again, I encourage you to go back and listen to 2 weeks ago, and then maybe contact him and get a copy of the book. So there's my plug. I don't know if he's on, but here, this slide actually is just summarizing the video you just watched. Plenty of sevens. I think it's God's favorite numbers. Now, we know in the Bible, and many of you know this as well, there's numerology in the Bible. God uses tens and 40s and hundreds and 120s, and but seven is used the most amount of times. I can't actually remember how many times it is used. I might have it in one of my slides, but and I know that Reverend John Nessel, just maybe 3 or 4 weeks ago, he had a PowerPoint, 3 or 4 PowerPoint slides, I believe, on other sevens in the Bible. In this, I'm just quickly, yeah, okay, I had came across this chart about the 7 cosmic phases of the earth. Simply looking at it, when you look at and you understand now, Reverend Nessel taught on Genesis 1:1, I believe, and 1:2, but 7 different phases of the earth of it's going through. I'm not teaching this tonight. I'm just mentioning it. We've got the original earth, number 1, and chaos happened. There was a chaotic earth, number 2. God had to set things back in order. Can you see you probably can't see my mouse, can you, on the slide? Okay, you can. So we had the original earth, right? In the beginning, God created, and then we had the catastrophe between Genesis 1:1 and 1:2, and we know that things became chaotic. The adversary was kicked out of heaven, and then we had God set it back up, and we had the third. I'm looking at the slide, and then I'm looking at my notes here. We had the old world 3. Then we had the flood. In of course, Genesis 6 and 7, we had the flood. That was the 4th. And then number 5, the Bible says this is the present evil world that we live in right now, the present earth. And what's going to take place, we know there's the book of the period of tribulation, and another judgment is coming. And so there's going to be judgment coming, unfortunately, but then there's we have the 6th millennial earth when we're reigning with Jesus. And then we know the Bible talks about a new heaven and a new earth. But again, if you count there, you've got 7. At the end of that millennial kingdom, the devil's going to come out of the pit, tries to overthrow God. There's been several times in history when the devil's tried to do that, but ultimately we are going to have a new heaven and a new earth. So, and nevertheless, there we see in 2 Peter, nevertheless, we, according to his promise, look for new heavens and a new earth in which righteousness dwells. Well, the number 7 is a key number in God's dealings with Israel. When it comes to the Sabbath, there's actually a number of Sabbaths that God gave Israel. There's a Sabbath of days. You have 7 days in a week, and you have the weekly Sabbath. Then there was a Sabbath of weeks, actually, a Sabbath of months. The 7 festivals, the holy days, holidays. I'll mention them very briefly tonight. Just we won't have time to cover it all. Not at all. I'll mention it when I get there. We'll talk about it. But the 7 festivals I'm speaking of. But then we have the 7 years. There was a Sabbath of years, and we know the 7-year tribulation simply as an example. There was even 7 times 7 years. And then remember, after the 49th year, you have the 50th year, which is the year of Jubilee. There's also 70 times 7. When we think about perhaps Daniel talking about the 70 times the 70 years. So God deals with Israel many times in 7s. Well, did you know that God teaches that the history of man is only 7,000 years? So conceivably, and we're going to talk about that in depth here coming up, conceivably or presumably, we've arrived at the final decade, at least of the 6,000s, less than 10 years to go till the return of Christ. Now, I'm not date setting. What I like to tell people is I don't date set, I Bible set. And there's so much more to say, but we'll leave that go for just a little bit later till the return of Christ, actually, perhaps, that we have that final decade in the 6,000 years. We're going to talk much about these 7,000 years of humanity here coming up in a moment. But now, why do I say that? Because it's because of what we see in 2 Peter 3. In 2 Peter 3, which is towards the end of the Bible, it says, knowing this first. You know what? I find it very interesting, a very interesting thing that Paul, by God, by way of Paul, he says, well, let's just see something here. Sorry. All right. Well, let me read this verse first. Knowing this first, that there shall come in the last days scoffers, walking after their own lusts and saying, where's the promise of his coming? For since the fathers fell asleep, all things continue as they were from the beginning of the creation. Remember, we're talking about the beginning here. God's telling us the end from the beginning. Well, in the beginning of the Bible, if these scoffers would bother to look, we have a very interesting thing. We have the story of how God set up everything in 6 days, and on the 7th day he rested. I know most everybody on the line, I would think probably everybody knows about that, the 6 days of creation. But when we keep reading here in 2 Peter 3, if you get down to verse 8, we have this verse, and it says, but beloved, be not ignorant of this one thing, that one day is with the Lord as 1,000 years, and 1,000 years as one day. Now, I know about figures of speech, and I know about similes and metaphors. But one thing I think it's interesting here is that there are 7 things that God tells us by way of Paul not to be ignorant of. Let me repeat that. 7 things God tells us not to be ignorant of. This is the 7th and the final thing that God tells us not to be ignorant of, that one day is with the Lord as 1,000 years, and 1,000 years as one day. And it gives us a formula that helps us to understand so many things that would open up the entire Bible to any God-fearing believer who is searching for truth. Because we're discussing Genesis tonight, let me just mention something. The solar day is 24 hours, and the solar year is 365 days. God set that up. However, there's 2 times in the Bible where God reveals how he views time from a different perspective. This is one of them. To me, it's interesting that they're both connected to the beginning, and that's 2 Peter 3:8, which is where the slide that's on here for you. And the other one is in Psalm 90, verse 4. Psalm 90, verse 4, well, if a day is like 1,000 years, and we're going to go to Psalm in a moment, and I want to show something to you. If a day is like 1,000 years and 1,000 years is like a day, then let's plug in 1,000 years to that, and let's look at those 7,000 years of human history in Genesis chapter 1. But you get an amazing story that's more than just coincidence. If you read your Bible and you look at this, because you see something, you'll start to see something very interesting. It's almost as if God, in his foreknowledge, knew what was going to happen in the history of man before it happened. Sounds like that's something God would know, right? Since he's omniscient, right? And all-knowing. To demonstrate how 1,000 years represents one prophetic day, 1,000 years representing one prophetic day, we simply take a look at when Christ, for example, the last Adam, he returns to earth at the conclusion of the tribulation period, remember? And he sets up his global government, remember? And where he's going to rule for 1,000 years. This period is sometimes called the day of the Lord, depending upon the context when you're reading the Bible. But when you regarding time, God sees 1,000 years related to end times as well. In the context of 2 Peter, God is not slack. He's not waiting arbitrarily to end things as we know them. He has a plan, and that plan is fashioned after the likings of a day being as 1,000 years and vice versa. I'm of the belief that this Bible verse, this particular one here, and the next one that I'm about to share with you, contain one of many of God's prophetic master time keys for his entire plan for mankind. So I moved forward, didn't I? I did. I just want to make sure. Yeah. All right. Just making sure I didn't skip a thing. So here in 2 Peter, it says, knowing this first, and we read this before, there shall come in the last days scoffers, from the beginning of creation. The mention of last days, interestingly enough, further in the verse, all things continue as they were from the beginning of creation. Well, that other verse is Psalm 90, verse 4. For 1,000 years in thy sight are but as yesterday when it is past, and as a watch in the night. Now, I have not worked as a watch in the night. I think there's probably a lot there too, but please stay with me here. I'm going to share with you about the following 6 or 7 slides, and we're going right back to the beginning here. Please pay very careful attention. I will endeavor to do this. I am not a Hebrew scholar. I would love to study Hebrew one day, but we're going to get just a little bit into the Hebrew, okay? So stay with me. Hang in there. Promise. All right. Psalm 90, verse 4. That word 1,000, I want you to take a look at it. See it there? Here's what's amazing about that verse. The word for 1,000 is the word Elef. Look on the left side, on the right side of the screen. E-L-E-F up top. Okay, it means 1,000. But also the first letter of the alphabet is Aleph. Okay, it also represents 1, and I have it right there on the slide for you. Aleph, the first letter of the Bible, means the beginning, the 1, 1,000, 26, etc. Now, in Hebrew, this word for 1,000 is the word Aleph. As I said, it's made up of 3 letters. I have it circled there. You see the 3 red letters. In Hebrew, every letter is a word. So if you have a 3-letter word, you've got 3 words within a word. Also, every Hebrew letter happens to have a number, and that's the whole study of Gematria you saw in that other clip. That's a whole study in itself, and my gosh, you could spend a lifetime on that. Now, watch this. So that word, we're looking at Aleph, and Aleph is the first letter of the alphabet. Our alphabet is A to Z. In the Hebrew alphabet, they have 22 letters. It's the Aleph, which is the first letter, A. Their last letter, our last letter is Z. Their last letter is the Tav. Okay, and we're going to get there in a second. But look at this first. This in front of you on the scroll is the first verse of the Bible. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Just bear with me. I'm going to show you so you can keep up with the words in the next slide or so. In the first verse, look at the 7, what was circled. It was mentioned in that clip. Aleph, the letter Aleph appears exactly 6 times. And remember, Aleph means 1,000. Okay, first verse of the Bible. 6 Aleph letters in the first verse hints, I'm just saying, hints to 6,000 years of history. But there's more. Now, the last letter of the alphabet, for us, it's the letter Z. In Hebrew, it's the Tav. You see that on the right hand. So when you put the Aleph, which is on the right side there, the 2 letters together, and the Tav together, you have the first and the last. Do you see that? That should be pretty, I'm trying to make this simple. The beginning and the end. All right. Well, when the Aleph and the Tav is just like saying in Greek, they say the Alpha and the Omega. In Hebrew, and we know that that's in the Word of God. In Hebrew, it's the Aleph and the Tav. We say from A to Z, from soup to nuts, right? So, but there's more. Stay with me. We're still about 1,000. All right. Now, if you notice, there are 7, here's the first verse of the Bible. There are 7 Hebrew words in Genesis 1:1. If you notice, we've been robbed in English of that middle word. It's really, that middle word there, it's really an Aleph and a Tav. Remember the first and the last. And it appears, these 2 letters together appear about, I don't know the exact number, but about, everything I could find, about 7,000 times, I believe, they appear in together. Now, remember, we know from the word Jesus, I am the Alpha and the Omega, right? All right, but there's more. So if you positionally look at the 7 olives, and if you think about, God said, be not ignorant. 1,000 years is as a day, and a day is like 1,000 years. Looking at this across, you'll see the 7. We have the 7 words in the Bible, in the first verse of the Bible, okay, in Hebrew. Now, mind you, you read in Hebrew, you read from the right to the left, not the way we read left to right to the left. 7. That we get robbed kind of in English because it's God, in the beginning created God the heavens and the earth. But 4, if you think of 4, 1,000 for each number, 4,000, Jesus's first coming, but there's more. The Vav, this is the only other letter, I promise you, that I'm going to teach you. The Vav is the 6th letter in the Hebrew alphabet. And it's shaped like a vertical line representing either a man standing or a nail. Okay. It's known to connect. It's a connector word, like the word and. When we have conjunctions, right? If you go back and you see under the number 6, do you see there on the left side? The and that Vav is there. All right. So the first time that letter Vav appears is in the very first verse of the Bible. And now what I'd like you to look at, in the middle, 4, at the 4, what we would say 4,000, you have, it connects, well, okay. I just want to grab my thoughts so I don't lose you. The connector word and is there, and you see the Vav in it. All right. The letter Vav is a connector letter. Now notice the Aleph and the Tav. And if we think of the Alpha and the Omega, the Aleph and the Tav, the first and the last, and Jesus, okay, you're thinking Jesus. Notice the Aleph and the Tav at the 4th position, 4,000 years from Adam. Then we see coming back at the 6,000. And this time it has the Vav with it. That's an Aleph and a Tav with a Vav connected. It's like the nail, the symbol of the nail, remember. So what do we have? I remember I in Zechariah, I know you don't necessarily memorize this. Zechariah chapter 12, verse 10, we will see him whom has been pierced. This is referring to both of his comings, the 4th day and the 6th day. And so again, we have in the very first verse of the Bible, 6,000 years, a second coming. This time you have the Alpha and the Omega, but you have the nail, the Vav next to it. But this is the part of the deep things of God. We won't spend any more time though. Right here in Genesis 1:1 though, we can see the first and second comings of Jesus. Now we'll go further into this, so things will come together. Revelation 1:7 says, look, he comes with clouds of heaven. Everyone will see him, even those who pierced him, and all the nations of the world will mourn for him. So that's in Revelation, in the book of Revelation, I believe, I can't remember what verse it is, but remember we see Jesus amongst the lands in the midst. Again, we see this, Jesus, as there are 7 Hebrew words in Genesis 1:1, but we see the 7th branch of the menorah there. You see him in the midst. The midst is in the midst. It's number 4. So while in the beginning, we're going to the 6 days of creation. A day is like 1,000 years and 1,000 years like a day. Well, the beginning was the 7-day creation story. There were 6 days of creations, and sometimes things are ordered chronologically. That's not the way Genesis 1 is. It's showing things happening in order of time or positionally. And here in chapter 1, God set it up positionally. All right. And I don't want to get into all the creationists and all that, but they have evolution. People have a real hard time with this slide. But here in Genesis 1, things are ordered positionally. Do you ever sit down and wonder why the Bible records that God created the world in 6 days and rested on the 7th? We will find, and you will see shortly, that the 7-day week in the creation story is a very abrupt prophetic synopsis of God's plans for mankind here on the planet Earth. How God told us the end from the beginning is and was all stunningly contained in the 7 days of creation story verbiage. God hid a secret prophecy in each creation day, foretelling the greatest event that occurred in that day's future millennium. Let me repeat that. God hid a secret prophecy in each creation day, foretelling already in just the first few verses of the Bible, the greatest event that would occur in that day's future millennium. Okay, so here we go. I won't spend too much time on this. Irenaeus was a student of Polycarp. Polycarp, if you don't know who Polycarp was, he was the last known living connection to the apostles. He was a direct disciple of John the Apostle, and John the Apostle was his tutor. Polycarp's tutor was John the Apostle, but Polycarp's student was Irenaeus. And here down on the right side there at the bottom, what is something that he had written in 150 AD. This creation story is an account of the things formerly created, as also it is a prophecy on what is to come. I believe John Wesley also, yeah, I thought I had that in here. The Anglican clergyman, remember the evangelist, founder of the Methodist movement, he said, God was foretelling from the beginning of the world future events which should happen in succeeding ages, even to the even to the end of the world. So in day one, what do we see in day one? The first step God took was right. God said, let there be light. Now, let me explain why the menorah is there, just so that you know. As I mentioned, I've taught this before, and I explained why, if you'll go back. I simply, during my He's Coming Back presentation, I utilized the menorah. This is the, there's several different menorahs, but just to show that light, God brought light to each and every millennia. That servant lamp is the middle. But for now, just pay attention to day one. First step God took, let there be light. Each day of creation, as I said, gives us the most significant, important spiritual event of that millennium. God said, let there be light, and there was light. God saw that it was good, right? Well, having eaten of the forbidden fruit, we know that the knowledge of good, and remember the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, they were told not to eat of it. And they learned also the difference between good and evil. God saw that the light was good, and he separated the light from the darkness. Well, in Genesis, by the time we get to Genesis 3, we see, and this is all in the first day, the first millennia. Therefore, God sent him forth, talking about Adam, forth out of the garden to till the ground from where he was taken. Each of the days, I'll just say each of the days except for the seventh day happens to include an evening and a morning, and always the evening comes first. But Adam, his sin separated him from God's light, and evil increased, and we know that. Adam fell short of a perfect day. Remember, Adam died at the age of 930 years, just shy of that first millennium. We know that the last Adam, Christ, he'll complete that entire, he won't fall short for sure, hasn't fallen short. But day one's most significant event was the fall of mankind, the fall of Adam. So he drove the man out, and he placed, remember, at the east of the garden, a cherubim, a flaming sword, to keep the way of the tree of life. So in day one, God foretold of the fall of Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden during that first 1,000 years. It was the greatest event of Earth's first millennium, and God had already prophesied about it in day one of creation. He said, let there be light, and he divided the light from the darkness. In the first millennium, Adam walked with God, but he was driven out. And we know that he lived, as I said, to the 930 years. The tree of knowledge, good and evil, behold, the man has become like one of us, knowing good and evil. And there was separation then. All right. I heard someone say recently that God moves in and out of prophecy so quickly and smoothly, it's almost breathtaking. And so we had that first 1,000 years when Adam and Eve sinned, the Garden of Eden, prophecy that good and evil would be divided sometime during that first millennia. Day 2, what happened day 2? We know. Day 2, God said, let there be a firmament in the midst of the waters, let it divide the waters. God made the firmament, right, that were under the firmament, the waters which were above the firmament. It was so. God called the firmament heaven, and evening and morning were the second day. A lot of emphasis on water, but from Adam to Noah, Noah's flood was 1,656 years for those of you who are interested, but the second millennia. In Great Creation Day 2, the prophetic verse, Genesis 1:6, let there be a sky in the midst of the waters. It was fulfilled ultimately. The floodgates of the sky were open. Remember, it had never rained before, and the earth was flooded. But that happened in the second millennia, day 2. The second millennia, the waters above and the waters below were used for judgment. And Genesis 7 discusses that, the second millennia. Interesting thing here, that was brought to my attention. There seems to be, and I'm not teaching on this, I like to throw nuggets out at people, things to ponder, things to think about. There seems to be a correlation between the ark and heaven, because God instructed Noah to build it, and 4 things caught my attention. God told Noah, make rooms in the ark with lower, second, and third 3 stories. And it's interesting that heaven talks about a first, second, and third heaven. God told Noah to make rooms in the ark. And it makes me think of Jesus when he said, I go to prepare a place for you. In my Father's house are many mansions. If you look at several of the translations, it says there are many rooms. God told Noah that to make a window for the ark. And I think about pouring. I know we talk about the windows of heaven pouring out of the flood, but also I think about the verses where God will pour out, if he will not open the windows of heaven and pour us out a blessing that there's not room enough to receive. And also God told Noah to put a door in the side of the ark, and we know Jesus Christ is the door. But interesting things to ponder. It would take, all of us to just look at the deep things of God that are written in Genesis. Also about the ark, God said, the Lord said unto Noah, come thou and all your house into the ark, for thee I have seen righteous before me in this generation. God's household, the righteous in God's household. Just interesting things there. So in day 2, Noah. Day 2's most significant event was the global flood during Noah's time, and that happened in the second millennia. Again, water's always associated with many major spiritual transitions. That's a whole study in itself. The Exodus, when you think about it, the Exodus of the crossing of the Red Sea, when Joshua crossing the Jordan, the transition between Elijah when he was taken up in a whirlwind after crossing the Jordan, John the Baptist, remember the baptism. There's just so many things. And water, I believe, though, even the dividing of the waters in early on in Genesis, with Genesis 1, is it 3, where God begins to talk about the waters. Just tremendous things there in the Bible about water. But here again, in the second day, the emphasis on water, and you can see why God's already prophesying. In day 3, God said, let the waters under the heaven be gathered together unto one place, and let the dry land appear. And then God starts calling the dry land earth. And I'm not going to read this whole slide, but you see how seed is mentioned quite a bit. It's mentioned, I think, actually 4 times, everything after its kind. And God, the tree yielding fruit, whose seed is in itself after his kind, God saw that it was good. So as I had, again, when you listen to my teaching on this, that I have in the last slide here, I have the link for you. I get into this chart here, the 6 days of creation. If you look at them, those were the major emphasis: the water, the sky, the land, the vegetation, the seed. Here we're talking about verse 3. And what do we know who came along in day 3? In the millennia, the third millennia, was Abraham. Remember, look up in the sky, look at the heavens, look at the stars. So shall thy seed be. God starts to tell us, who the lineage, where the seed, the promised seed of Genesis 3:15, who's going to defeat the adversary, where that lineage, whose loins it would come through. So we see that Abraham, that through his seed, all the nations of the world, of the earth would be blessed. Abraham walked with God. He brought light. His family brought light. Noah also. So here in the third day, day three's most significant event was God's covenantal seed, his seed promise, I should say, God's seed promise to Abraham, which was a promise that the Messiah, Jesus, would one day come through his loins. However, I will give credence to, because again, others have seen other things. Truly, the Exodus, that same seed line. Remember, Abraham had Isaac and Isaac had Jacob, and Jacob, right? His name was changed to Israel. That whole family line, they wound up in bondage in Egypt. Remember the story of Joseph. And so truly, that's also a significant event. It's interesting that God does mention waters were gathered, let the dry land appear. Remember, and the Exodus of the splitting of the Red Sea, perhaps God also was prophesying already in Genesis, the early verses, prophesying of the parting of the Red Sea event along with Abraham and his seed. Because here you see, quite frankly, I think you can see it, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob down here on the bottom. That's the third millennium is starting, that brown section. And then ultimately his lineage has the Exodus. All right, Abraham was born in, well, not necessary, just trying to cut to the chase here, but he was 100 years old when he had Isaac. And then, of course, leading into that third millennium, that's what we see as far as the lineage for ultimately where Jesus Christ, through which Jesus Christ was born. The entire story of the Israelites and the parting of the Red Sea event happened on the third day. Both events happened in the third millennium. God had told us everything from the beginning. And God said, let there be lights. This is day 4. Let there be lights in the firmament of the heaven to divide the day from the night. Let them be for signs and for seasons and for days and for years. I'm just going to take 3 slides as a segue. I had hoped, but because of time, I just knew ultimately we couldn't handle the 7 holidays, the 7, some people call them 7 feasts. Actually, there's 3 feasts, but there's 7 holidays. But it's all about this. It's all about the calendar. Let me just go back here. It's all about the calendar and how God set it up to be, utilizing the sun, the moon, the stars, and the planets, and the calendar. Another whole different teaching. And some of you, again, can go back to my teaching. I have this last slide. And perhaps later in Old Testament history, when John gets to Leviticus, perhaps, so that area we can discuss this. But God set up the calendar using Genesis 1:14, the sun, the moon, and the stars, in light of their agricultural season in Israel and the harvest cycle. He set up the entire plan of man's redemption. Let me say that again. God's redemption plan, starting in this verse, Genesis 1:14. And I don't have the time to share this all with you tonight. It's another teaching. But there were 3 major harvests, but 7 holidays. And of course, then there's the last great day. Those holidays were, as you can see right there, in order, have to do with Christ's first coming, the church period era, and Christ's second coming. All of these feasts were, and Jesus Christ fulfilled them all in succession, in order, and during his first coming. And mark my words, he will fulfill the last 3 in the last harvest in the same order. Christ's first, whole different teaching. That's just segue. I wanted to just bring that in. And lastly, Leviticus 23, to learn about the beginnings of learning on those feasts, although is in Leviticus chapter 23. They were all rehearsals, dress rehearsals. But again, It's in Genesis 1:14 on the fourth day that I don't, and I apologize, I just don't have the time to get into it tonight. That's where it's all explodes like fireworks. God set that all up, those feasts and the rehearsals, and it stems from Genesis 1:14, God's entire plan of redemption for mankind. However, what I would like to focus on is in day 4, God made 2 great lights, the greater light to rule the day and the lesser light to rule the night. He made the stars also. Well, in light of a day is like 1,000 years and 1,000 years is like a day, the stars, many of the kings and the prophets, they were lights to Israel, talking about illuminaries, okay, like stars. And there was a great light and a lesser light that came in the personage of John the Baptist and Jesus Christ. It's during the 4th millennium. David was king for 1,000 years from Abraham. That's beginning in that 4th millennium. The stars repeatedly are used as symbols, for individuals who shine light. However, in the 4th millennium, we see like Ezekiel, Daniel, Jeremiah, Micah, Joel, Amos, Zechariah, so many of the Old Testament prophets, illuminaries, if you will, like stars. But the great light, Jesus Christ, as you know, is called, some of you know, and if you don't know, I'm telling you, Jesus Christ is called the Sun, S-U-N, of righteousness. And this 4th millennium concluded with the introduction of that great light, Jesus Christ, of the seed of David. The Sun, S-U-N, reflects the Son, S-O-N. And Jesus said, remember, I am the light. I am the light of the world. Well, I'd like to take you a step further, and that would be the moon. The moon reflects the brightness of the sun, okay? And it shines in the darkness of the night. Well, just like the moon reflects or bears witness of the true light of the sun, so too John the Baptist. John the Baptist merely bore witness of Christ's light. Do you remember that verse there in John 1:8? It says there on the bottom of your screen, bottom right, he was not that light, but was sent to bear witness of that light. The Apostle John wrote, he, John the Baptist, was not that light, but was sent to bear witness. There's very little, here we go, sorry about that. There's very little recorded in the Bible of the things that John the Baptist actually said. And yet this is one of the verses where John, in John 3:30, and up there on the right-hand side, John the Baptist himself said, he must become greater and I must become less. And God had said he made a greater light to rule the day and a lesser light to rule the night. Are you kidding me? I don't know. I have to take a breath. The word is so deep. It is so, talk about deep and wide, the detail. And many of you on the call, I know you personally, and you've been taught well that everything, God has a purpose. Remember, for everything he says, where he says it, why he says it, how he says it, to whom he says it, when he says it. But Jesus said about John the Baptist, and Jesus had said about John the Baptist that he was a burning and shining light, and you were willing for a season to rejoice in his light. But I have a greater witness than John's, for the works which the Father has given me to finish the very works that I do bear witness of me, that the Father has sent me. But there's the greater and the lesser lights that God prophetically was making known in the 4th millennium, day 4, the most significant event was God's creation of the greater and the lesser lights, which foretold of the coming of John the Baptist and Jesus Christ. And here it says, I believe we're heading to day 5. This is day 5 now. God said, let the waters bring forth abundantly the moving creature that has life and fowl. God created the great whales after their kind, the winged fowls. And he said, he blessed them and he said, be fruitful and multiply, fill the waters and let the fowl multiply in the earth. And the evening and the morning were the 5th day. Now, I'm just going to say, and I'm just skipping for a moment. And then in the sixth day, God said, see, I've given you every herb that yields seed, which is on the face of all the earth, and every tree. And then he says also every beast of the earth, every bird of the air, every creeping thing that creeps on the earth in which there is life. And God moves on, and it says there, so the evening and the morning were the sixth day. Well, the reason I wanted to read them together was because the first time, and again, you have to go back to my other teaching to grasp more information. It was this chart, that I was staring at literally for hours. I don't know how many hours, 2-3 hours. And I know I prayed and God showed me what I know. I just know how God works. And as I stared at day 5 and 6, it wasn't coming to me. I could, and I know that, I share it in my other clip from last year, that I just loud and clear, go to a voice, just go to Acts 10 and 11. And then it hit me, all those sea creatures and flying creatures and lands and creeping things. If you remember, in Acts chapter 10 and 11, there's a great record. Up until that time, only the Jews had received, we see nothing about the Gentiles, okay? And it's in chapter 10 where Cornelius, let me just flip to, well, I won't flip just yet. Cornelius, a Gentile, wanted to hear more of the word of God. And Peter, being a Jew, here's the record in Acts chapter 10. Peter goes up on the housetop to pray about the 6th hour. As you know, the Jews, they have the Levitical law, they have their culture, they have what they can eat, what they can't eat. And he became very hungry, and he would have eaten, but while he made ready, or they made ready in the house below, because he's up on the rooftop, he fell into a trance. Bad translation there. He had a vision, and he saw heaven opened and a certain vessel descending unto him, as it had been a great sheet knit with at the 4 corners. And what was in that, wherein verse 12, wherein all manner of 4-footed beasts, wild beasts, creeping things, fowls of the air. Back in Genesis, on the 5th and 6th day, God has the 4-footed beasts and the wild beasts and the creeping things and the fowls of the air. But this was a teaching for Peter. I'll connect the dots in a moment. There came a voice to Peter, rise, Peter, kill and eat. But Peter said, no, not so, Lord, for I've never eaten anything that's common or unclean. And God had to show him this 3 times. So here you see on the left side, you see Peter. This is a rendition of what it might have been like. He sees this vision, all these creeping things, but God was preparing him, because God will do that for you and I too. He was preparing him to go to the house of Cornelius, because the house of Cornelius were Gentiles, and he would not be found dead, as the saying goes, we would say today, at a Gentile's house and talking to them. And he hears, kill Peter, get up, Peter, kill and eat 3 times. Finally, the vision goes away, and right at that same time, there's a knock at the door, or at the gate, and there's 6 men, I believe it was, to bring him back to the house of Cornelius. And that's when the first time we read in the book of Acts where the Gentiles hear the word of God. And of course, we know they spoke in tongues, they got born again. And Peter opens his mouth in Acts chapter 10, and he says, of a truth, I perceive that God is no respecter of persons. And we start to see that whole imagery of the Jews and the Gentiles becoming one. Days 5 and 6 are about you and I. It's about the apostles and the body of Christ, the Jews and Gentiles. In the 5th and 6th millennium, Jew and Gentile, God's no respecter of persons, and God utilized the fowls and the beasts, etc., to show and to teach Peter, to prepare Peter's heart to go and talk and witness to the Gentiles. But however, I also realize, and well, let me just say this. And so that's you. you and I, we bring the light. Here we're talking about light in every generation. In the 4,000 to 6,000, the fifth and the sixth day, those 2 millenniums, the most significant event was the new birth and the rise and the expansion of the Christian church. And you and I carry that light, right? We're lights in the world. It says, shine as lights in Philippians 2, that we would be blameless and harmless. And then, and God also says in that fifth and sixth days afterwards, God says, be fruitful and multiply. Yes, indeed. However, I also recognize, so these 2 days are what's the last days. These are the days we're living in. You've heard the term looking at these 2 last days. I understand there's even more here to that. And that would be, for example, remember, a day is like 1,000 years and 1,000 years like a day. If you look at, can you see the numbers across the top? I just want to make sure people aren't seeing my, can you see the numbers? They go across? Yes, no? Yeah, okay, it's covered. There's that arrow, that blue arrow has 1 to 4. Right here is day 1, day 2, day 3, day 4. There was no life. If you read about, when we read in Genesis, in those days, there's no life except plant life. Days 5 and 6 is where life all of a sudden, remember the verse in Ephesians, as for you, you were dead in trespasses and sin. For the first 4 days until Christ came, and we were made alive once again, body, soul, and spirit, life created. We now have eternal life. Days 5 and 6 were only 2 days that God created life other than plant life, meaning those creatures and the fish of the sea and the birds of the air that were created on day 5 and 6, including beasts of the field. Remember, prior there was no life, but this is God's way, I believe, of prophesying that man would be dead to sin for 4 days or for 4,000 years until the arrival of the Messiah, Jesus Christ, after he would die on the cross, give his life, and get resurrected from the dead. And just very intriguing here. And then, of course, on the 6th day, we know that on the 6th day, God created man. And we also know, and, you know, it says ultimately, when God said he created man, let him have dominion and power, ultimately the last days do end with a man of perdition, otherwise known as the Antichrist, who will soon subdue. He will have dominion, if the word is right, and I believe God's word is right, the entire globe during the end of the 6th millennial day. Ultimately, God made the beast. He created man in his own image, and he said, have dominion, and the fulfillment will be in the near future. They worship the beast. He has dominion of all kindreds, tongues, and nations, was given him power to give life to the image. Remember, God said he created man in his own image. And yet we have that counterfeit, that at the end, the image of the beast. Again, don't want to give a lot of credence to this, but God set it all up in the 6 days of creation. It's prophetic to the nth degree. He has truly told us the end from the beginning. And then we get to day 7. So God blessed the 7th day and hallowed it, because on it, God rested from all of his work that he had done in creation. And here we see kind of like a work week, right? Only God didn't take a weekend. 6 days of work, and on the 7th day he rested. The number 6, you know, and that's where the Shabbat comes in, the Sabbath rest, 6,000 years, and then the 7th. And day 7, we know that it's going to be again a 1,000-year reign. The earth will be restored, man will rest, and it'll be a millennial Sabbath, not just a weekly Sabbath or a special Sabbath. It'll be a millennial, 1,000 years for all of those who have accepted Jesus as Lord and Savior and believe that God raised him from the dead. And I always throw this in here just for a little chuckle. My husband, he always says that the Dominican Republic is paradise. And so here's God resting. That's why the palm trees in the Dominican Republic. But Jesus Christ, sorry that has things up there. It says Jesus Christ on the 7th day during the 6th to the 7th 1,000 years. It's the most significant event in that 7,000, that seventh day is that Satan will be locked up, and only all the resurrected righteous will live on a new regenerated earth. Jesus will judge, and there will be no wars. In other words, it will be a millennial day of rest on planet Earth. And here we have 1,000 years of peace. They lived and reigned with Christ 1,000 years. And then we have the eighth day, which is not written in Genesis 1, but talks about an eighth day in eternity. Now, more than just mere coincidence, we see an all-knowing and all-powerful mathematical genius of a God who knew he was going to let man live for 7,000 years on this earth. And then after that, he's going to change it all. And he does that with a new heaven and a new earth. And all I can say is, oh, the depth of the riches, both of the wisdom and the knowledge of God, how unsearchable are his judgments and unfathomable his ways. That's it from Romans. And just couple more slides here and we'll be done. An interesting thing, now you can understand the creation week when you read verses like this one. For example, in Hosea, come and let us return unto the Lord, for he hath torn, he will heal us. He hath smitten, he will bind us up. And then it says, after 2 days will he revive us. In the third day, he will raise us up, because that was spoken here where you see my mouse, okay? And then after 2 days, the fifth and sixth day, the church era, the 2,000 years that you and I are about to close out soon. That's after 2 days here on the third day. Here's that third day talked about in Hosea. And things start to become very clear as you understand the 6 days of creation. Albert Einstein said, when the solution is simple, God is answering. So in summary, there were 6 days to create everything that God needed. Okay, God didn't need 6 days. He didn't need 1 day. He could have done it in a millisecond, I'm sure. But no, he purposely chose to use 7 days in the creation story in order to lay out the timing scenario for mankind. Then he hid that secret prophecy in each creation day, foretelling the greatest event that occurred in that day's future millennium. On day 1, he foretold of the fall of Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. On day 2, God foretold of the global flood of Noah's day and the clockwork that it took, and like clockwork, it took place in the second millennium. On day 3, God foretold of the lineage of the promised seed, the promised Messiah, through the seed of Abraham and his family and their exodus out of Egypt and the parting of the Red Sea, freeing his lineage from the bondage in Egypt, which took place in that third millennium. And here in the fourth day, God foretold of Jesus and John the Baptist, who were the greater and lesser lights. They were prophesied about. And then in creation day 5 and 6, the last days of which we live in now, the outpouring of the Holy Spirit in the fifth millennium and the beginning of the church of the body, although the mystery hadn't been revealed until it was revealed until the Apostle Paul on the road to Emmaus, I just had a brain freeze there. So sorry. And then we know that the creation day 6 is when the Antichrist is prophesied. Man was created that day, but he will have dominion and power. But ultimately, that seventh day of rest is coming. So folks, only days 6 and 7 are yet to be completely fulfilled, which would include the Antichrist fulfilling his role more than likely, and I say more than likely, within the next 10 years, because that's about how long we have. But that's another whole teaching, and that really all depends on certain calendar things of where we start the timing, the clock. But God set it out, the 7,000 years, make no bones about it. And so that will be followed by Jesus Christ and his return to set up his kingdom. And whoops. So hold on. All right, here we go.
In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. And the earth God said, let there be light.
God saw everything that he had made, and indeed it was very good. Well, I know this will be posted some in the future, and you can pull from this. These are those other three teachings I had done last year for John. And we're back to declaring the end from the beginning. So God, thanks in the name of Jesus Christ for the incredible word that you've given us. It is so deep. It is so wide, but it's all in there. And so thank you, John. Take it away. Remember, my goal is to have that you fall in love with the magnitude and the magnificence of both God and his word. Amen.
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 Amen.